The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Colonel Matthews stepped forward, his weathered face breaking into a smile I'd never seen before. My father stood frozen, his retirement ceremony suddenly silent as every eye in the room turned to me. Sarah Elizabeth Crawford, the family disappointment. But what happened next would shatter everything my relatives thought they knew about failure. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I should probably start from the beginning, because the woman standing in that officers' club in Fort Braxton that evening was nothing like the girl who'd left Millbrook, Tennessee 15 years earlier. Back then, I was just another Crawford kid who couldn't measure up to the impossible standards my father had set. Lieutenant Colonel James Crawford wasn't just our dad. He was a legend in our small town. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Bronze Star that sat proudly on our mantelpiece next to his West Point graduation photo. Everyone knew his story. The local newspaper ran features about him every Veterans Day. The high school named their ROTC program after him. He was the kind of man who made other fathers feel inadequate, and their children feel like they were constantly climbing an impossible mountain. My older brother Marcus had followed the family tradition perfectly. Top of his class at West Point, Army Ranger, now a major stationed in Germany with a wife who looked like she stepped out of a recruitment poster, and 2 kids who already knew how to properly fold an American flag. Marcus was everything our father had dreamed of: disciplined, decorated, and devoted to service. Then there was my younger sister Emma. She'd taken a different but equally respectable path, becoming a trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins. She saved lives daily, worked impossible hours, and never complained. When she called home, it was always with news of another commendation, another life saved, another reason for Dad to beam with pride. And then there was me. I'd tried to follow Marcus to West Point. Really tried. I spent 2 years at the preparatory school, pushing myself through advanced calculus and physics, drilling with the other hopefuls until my muscles screamed. But when the acceptance letter never came, when I watched my classmates move on to careers in olive drab while I headed to Tennessee State University instead, something inside me shifted. Dad never said I was a disappointment. He didn't have to. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged slightly whenever someone asked about his kids. He'd light up talking about Marcus's latest assignment or Emma's research, but when it came to me, he'd just say, "Sarah's finding her way," in a tone that suggested I'd been lost for quite some time. College was supposed to be my fresh start. I majored in computer science, thinking maybe I could contribute to national defense through technology. But even that felt like a consolation prize. While my classmates were excited about startup opportunities and 6-figure salaries, I felt like I was floating through life without a real purpose. The real breaking point came during my junior year. I'd been struggling with my advanced programming courses, spending sleepless nights in the computer lab trying to debug code that seemed to mock my every attempt. One particularly brutal Thursday, after failing another exam, I called home in tears. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this," I sobbed into the phone. "Maybe I should just drop out and figure something else out." Dad's response was quiet, measured, and devastating. "Sarah, your grandfather didn't storm the beaches of Normandy, and I didn't serve 3 tours so you could quit when things get hard. Crawford women don't give up. Your mother worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school while raising you kids. Emma is saving lives. You need to find something worth fighting for." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, Dad never was, but because they were true. I was drifting, and everyone could see it. I was the only Crawford who hadn't found her calling, who hadn't proven herself worthy of the family name. That conversation changed everything, but not in the way Dad probably hoped. Instead of inspiring me to try harder at computer science, it made me realize I needed to find my own path entirely. Something that mattered, something that would make a difference. I started volunteering at the local VA hospital, initially thinking it might help me understand what Dad and other veterans had gone through. The first day, I was assigned to help with recreational activities, basically running bingo games and helping organize movie nights. It seemed trivial, almost insulting to these men and women who'd sacrificed so much. But then I met Tommy Rodriguez, a Marine who'd lost both legs in Helmand Province. He was only 23, just a year older than me, but his eyes held experiences I couldn't imagine. Tommy was struggling with severe depression, barely speaking to staff, refusing to participate in physical therapy. The doctors were concerned he was giving up. I started spending my lunch breaks just sitting with him, not trying to cheer him up or offer empty platitudes, just being present. Eventually he started talking. Not about the war, not about his injuries, but about his younger sister who was struggling in school, about his mother who worked nights at a diner to pay for his sister's textbooks, about his dreams of becoming a teacher that seemed impossible now. I used to help kids with math after school, he told me one afternoon, staring out the window at the parking lot. Made me feel like I was building something, instead of just existing. That's when the idea hit me. What if we could set up a program where veterans could tutor local students? Not just as therapy, but as a real way to contribute, to feel valued and needed again? I spent the next 3 months researching, writing proposals, and meeting with hospital administrators. The program I designed wasn't just about matching veterans with students. It was about creating a comprehensive support system that addressed both academic needs and the veterans' psychological well-being. The Veterans Academic Partnership Program launched with 6 veteran volunteers and 12 local students. Tommy was our first success story. Watching him light up as he explained algebra to a struggling 8th grader was like watching someone come back to life. Within 6 months, our program had expanded to 3 schools and had a waiting list of both veterans and students. But the real breakthrough came when I realized we needed better technology to track progress and match veterans with students based on their specific skills and the kids' needs. I developed a custom software platform that analyzed learning styles, subject strengths, and even personality compatibility. It was more complex than anything I'd attempted in my computer science classes, but it was driven by purpose rather than grades. The platform worked so well that other VA hospitals started requesting access. Within 2 years, we had implementations in 8 states. I was traveling constantly, training staff, refining the system, and seeing firsthand how technology could transform lives when it was applied with intention and heart. My family's reaction was complicated. Dad was proud, I think, but also confused. This wasn't the kind of success he understood. There were no medals, no clear rank structure, no flag-draped ceremonies. Emma called it social work with computers. Marcus, during one of his rare visits home, suggested I should think about real career advancement and maybe consider applying to work for defense contractors. The comments stung because they revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what I was trying to build. This wasn't a hobby or a stepping stone to something more respectable. This was my life's work, my contribution to the world, my way of serving others. Things got worse during family gatherings. Thanksgiving dinners became exercises in careful conversation, where Marcus would dominate discussions with stories of military exercises and strategic planning, while Emma would share updates from the hospital that made everyone nod approvingly. When relatives asked about my work, I'd try to explain the program, but I could see their eyes glaze over when I mentioned software development or therapeutic outcomes. Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother who'd served in Vietnam, was the worst. He'd listen to my explanations with barely concealed impatience, then turn to whoever was sitting next to him and say something like, "Well, it's nice that Sarah found something to keep her busy." As if I was running a craft circle instead of a program that had helped over 3,000 veterans regain their sense of purpose. The final straw came last Christmas. We were all gathered at Mom and Dad's house, and Marcus was showing off photos from his latest promotion ceremony. The pride on Dad's face was unmistakable as he studied each picture, asking detailed questions about the other officers, the base, the significance of various traditions. Then Emma shared news about a research paper she'd co-authored that was being published in a major medical journal. More beaming pride, more detailed questions, more obvious satisfaction from parents who could easily explain their daughter's achievements to anyone who asked. When it was my turn to share updates, I mentioned that our program had just received a National Recognition Award from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was a huge honor. Only 12 programs nationwide were selected, and ours was the only one developed and run by someone under 30. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, but her attention was already drifting to the kitchen, where she was mentally preparing the next course. Dad nodded politely, but didn't ask any follow-up questions. Uncle Robert, who'd had a few too many glasses of wine, decided to share his thoughts. "You know, Sarah, it's great that you're helping people and all, but when are you going to do something substantial? Something that actually matters in the real world?" The silence that followed was deafening. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as everyone suddenly found their dinner plates fascinating. Nobody defended me. Nobody pointed out that my work had a measurable impact on thousands of lives. Nobody mentioned that I'd built something from nothing, that I'd created jobs and opportunities and hope. "I am doing something substantial," I said quietly. "I'm helping veterans rebuild their lives. I'm giving students access to mentors they never would have had. I'm using technology to solve real problems for real people." Uncle Robert waved his hand dismissively. "That's charity work, Sarah. That's not a career. When are you going to get serious about your life?" I looked around the table at my family, these people who claimed to value service above all else, and realized they couldn't recognize service when it didn't come with a uniform or a stethoscope. They couldn't see past their own narrow definitions of success to understand what I'd built. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped trying to prove myself to them. I stopped seeking their approval or validation. I focused entirely on the work, on the veterans who needed support, on the students who needed tutoring, on the hospitals and schools that needed better systems. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Over the next 3 years, the program exploded. We received federal funding, expanded to 42 states, and started attracting attention from policymakers and researchers. I was invited to speak at conferences, to testify before congressional committees, to consult with other organizations trying to replicate our success. But the most important recognition came from the veterans themselves. Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been our first success story, had completed his teaching degree and was now working at a high school in El Paso. He sent me a photo of his classroom, filled with students who had no idea their teacher had once wanted to die, who saw only a man passionate about mathematics and dedicated to their success. "You saved my life," he wrote, "not just by giving me something to do, but by showing me I still had something to give." I received letters like that regularly. Veterans who'd found purpose again, students who'd discovered they were capable of more than they'd imagined, families who'd been reunited with loved ones who'd remembered how to hope. But my own family remained skeptical. They were proud, I think, but in the way you're proud of a child who's learned to play a musical instrument. Pleased, but not particularly impressed. They still saw my work as temporary, as something I'd eventually outgrow in favor of a real career. That attitude persisted right up until the day everything changed. The day Dad announced his retirement, we all gathered to celebrate a man who dedicated his life to serving others, never realizing that his daughter had been doing the same thing all along, just in a different uniform. As I stood in that officers' club in Fort Braxton, watching Dad shake hands with colleagues who'd shaped his career, I had no idea that Colonel Matthews was about to reveal a secret that would transform not just how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. The officers' club at Fort Braxton was everything I'd expected: mahogany panels, brass fixtures, and walls lined with photographs of distinguished military personnel spanning decades. Dad had reserved the main dining room for his retirement celebration, and the guest list read like a who's who of his 30-year career. Generals, colonels, and fellow officers mingled with their spouses, sharing war stories and reminiscing about deployments that had shaped their lives. I'd driven down from Nashville the night before, staying at a modest hotel near the base rather than with family. The decision wasn't born from anger, but from a need for space to process what this evening meant. Dad's retirement marked the end of an era, not just for him but for our entire family. The military had been our North Star for as long as I could remember. and now that guiding light was shifting into something new. Emma had flown in from Baltimore, looking polished and professional in a navy dress that complemented her naturally confident demeanor. She'd brought her husband David, a fellow surgeon who fit seamlessly into military social circles, with his crisp bearing and easy conversation about global affairs. They moved through the crowd like diplomats, charming everyone they encountered. Marcus had managed to get leave from Germany, arriving with his picture-perfect family in tow. His wife Jennifer looked stunning in an emerald cocktail dress, while their two children, 8-year-old Michael and 6-year-old Rebecca, behaved with the kind of impeccable manners that made other parents both envious and slightly intimidated. Marcus wore his dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that caught the light as he moved, drawing approving nods from the other officers. I'd chosen a simple black dress, elegant but understated, paired with the pearl necklace Mom had given me for my college graduation. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention or invite questions about my unconventional career path. I'd learned years ago that family events required a certain kind of camouflage. Blend in, smile politely, and avoid topics that might lead to awkward explanations about why I'd never married, never had children, and never pursued what they considered a normal life. The evening began with cocktails and mingling, the kind of structured social interaction that military families excel at. I found myself gravitating toward conversations with other officers' adult children, people who understood the unique pressures of growing up in families where service wasn't just a job, but a calling. Some had followed their parents into the military, others had rebelled completely, and a few, like me, had found alternative ways to serve. Captain Morrison's daughter worked for the Peace Corps in Guatemala. Colonel Bennett's son had become a firefighter in Denver. These conversations felt natural, unforced, filled with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. We understood each other's struggles with living up to impossible standards, with finding our own paths while honoring our family's values. But inevitably, relatives would interrupt these comfortable exchanges, steering me toward conversations I dreaded. Aunt Patricia, Dad's sister, cornered me near the bar while I was waiting for a club soda. "Sarah, dear, you look lovely tonight," she began, her tone carrying that particular brand of false warmth that preceded invasive questions. "Now tell me, are you still doing that computer thing with the veterans?" The dismissive phrase "computer thing" immediately set my teeth on edge, but I managed to keep my voice level. "I'm still running the Veterans Academic Partnership Program, yes. We've expanded significantly over the past year." "That's nice, sweetie. But surely you're thinking about settling down soon? You're not getting any younger, and I know your parents worry about you being all alone in Nashville." The assumption that my life was somehow incomplete without a husband and children was nothing new, but it still stung, particularly because it came from someone who'd never shown any genuine interest in understanding what I'd built, or why it mattered to me. "I'm quite content with my life, Aunt Patricia. The work is fulfilling, and I've built a wonderful community of colleagues and friends." She patted my arm in that condescending way that older relatives perfect, the gesture that says they know better about your life than you do. "Of course, dear. But work isn't everything. Family is what really matters." I wanted to point out that my work was about family, about helping veterans reconnect with their loved ones, about giving students the educational support that families couldn't always provide, about building communities of mutual support and understanding. But I knew she wouldn't understand, so I just smiled and excused myself to find the restroom. The bathroom became my refuge, a quiet space where I could collect myself and prepare for more of these interactions. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing a woman who'd accomplished more than most people twice her age, who'd created something meaningful from nothing, who'd touched thousands of lives in measurable ways. But in this environment, surrounded by these people, I felt like I was still the confused college student who'd called home crying about failing a programming exam. When I returned to the main room, dinner was being served. The seating arrangement had been carefully planned, with Dad at the head table surrounded by his closest colleagues and immediate family. I found myself at a table with various cousins, uncle and aunts, and family friends, people who'd known me since childhood but hadn't really seen me since. The conversation over dinner was predictably focused on military life, with various guests sharing favorite memories of serving with Dad. Stories about joint exercises, challenging deployments, and the camaraderie that develops between soldiers facing difficult situations together. These were good stories, important stories, and I enjoyed hearing perspectives on my father's career that I'd never encountered before. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice something troubling. Whenever someone mentioned current challenges facing veterans, particularly issues related to mental health or transitioning back to civilian life, the conversation quickly shifted to other topics. These were decorated officers, men and women who dedicated their lives to taking care of their troops, but they seemed uncomfortable discussing the ongoing struggles that many veterans faced after leaving the service. During one particularly revealing exchange, Colonel Stevens was recounting a story about a young sergeant who'd served under both him and Dad during their deployment to Afghanistan. The sergeant had been an exemplary soldier, decorated for bravery and leadership. But Stevens mentioned, almost in passing, that the young man had struggled significantly after returning home. "Tragic situation," Stevens said, shaking his head. "Good soldier, good man, just couldn't seem to find his footing in civilian life. Ended up with some personal problems, family difficulties, real shame." I wanted to ask more, to understand what kind of support the sergeant had received, whether anyone had helped him translate his military skills into civilian opportunities. But before I could speak, the conversation moved on to lighter topics, as if acknowledging the ongoing challenges faced by veterans was somehow inappropriate for a celebration. This pattern repeated throughout the evening. Mentions of former colleagues who'd struggled with alcohol, who'd gone through difficult divorces, who'd had trouble finding meaningful employment after leaving the military. Each story was quickly dismissed or redirected, as if the very existence of these problems reflected poorly on the military culture they all cherished. I found myself growing increasingly frustrated. These were exactly the issues my program was designed to address. The veterans I worked with weren't failures or cautionary tales. They were people who needed support, structure, and purpose as they transitioned to civilian life. They needed to feel valued and useful, to understand that their skills and experiences had ongoing relevance. But I also realized something else. The people at this dinner, despite their genuine love for Dad and their respect for military service, existed in a bubble. They socialized primarily with other military families, lived on or near military bases, and had limited exposure to the messy realities of veteran life outside the structured support system of active duty. After dinner, Dad stood to make his remarks. He thanked his colleagues for their service, their friendship, and their support throughout his career. He spoke about the honor of serving alongside such dedicated professionals, and the pride he felt in contributing to something larger than himself. Then he turned to family, his voice becoming more personal and emotional. He thanked Mom for her sacrifices, for managing a household and raising children through multiple deployments, for creating a stable home base that allowed him to serve effectively. He spoke about Marcus with obvious pride, praising his son's distinguished service and his commitment to carrying on the family tradition. His words about Emma were equally warm and proud. He talked about her dedication to healing, her brilliant mind, and her commitment to saving lives. He called her a different kind of warrior, fighting battles against disease and injury with the same courage and determination that soldiers brought to combat. When he turned to me, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. Dad smiled in my direction, his expression warm but slightly uncertain, as if he wasn't quite sure how to categorize my contributions in a way that would resonate with his audience. "And my daughter Sarah," he began, his voice carrying genuine affection but also a hint of careful diplomacy. "Sarah has always marched to the beat of her own drum. She's found her own way to serve others, working with veterans, and using her technical skills to help people in need. I'm proud of her compassion and her dedication to making a difference." The applause was polite but brief. I could feel the collective puzzlement of the room. People who understood military service and medical service, but weren't quite sure what to make of someone who'd chosen a different path. Dad's words were kind but generic, the sort of thing you might say about any family member whose career you didn't quite understand but wanted to support anyway. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the club's terrace, needing fresh air and a moment away from the crowd. The night was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of honeysuckle from the gardens surrounding the building. I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter from inside, but out here, I could finally breathe. I was scrolling through my phone, checking emails from work, when I noticed a message from one of our program coordinators in Arizona. A veteran named James Patterson had just landed his first teaching job after completing our program. He'd been struggling with severe PTSD and had been essentially unemployed for 3 years before joining our initiative. Now he was going to be teaching high school history, sharing his experiences and passion for learning with students who desperately needed positive role models. The message included a photo of James in his new classroom, hanging up maps and arranging desks for his first day. His smile was radiant, transformative, the expression of someone who'd rediscovered his purpose and his worth. I'd seen that smile hundreds of times over the past 5 years, on the faces of veterans who'd found their way back to meaningful lives through our program. Looking at that photo while standing on the terrace of an officers' club filled with people who couldn't quite understand what I did for a living, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what I'd built, frustration with my family's inability to see its value, and a deep sadness about the disconnect between the military community's stated values and their comfort with addressing ongoing challenges. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I didn't notice someone approaching until a voice behind me said, "Mind if I join you out here?" I turned to find Colonel Matthews, one of Dad's oldest friends and closest colleagues. He was a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made junior officers straighten their posture automatically. I'd known him peripherally for years, but we'd never had a substantial conversation. "Of course, Colonel Matthews. It's a beautiful evening." He moved to stand beside me at the railing, looking out over the base's carefully manicured grounds. For a moment, we stood in comfortable silence, two people sharing a quiet moment away from the formal celebration inside. "Your father's very proud of you, you know," he said finally, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised me. I smiled politely, the kind of smile I'd perfected for well-meaning relatives who wanted to reassure me about my place in the family. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Colonel Matthews turned to look at me directly, his expression more serious than I'd expected. "I don't think you understand what I mean. I'm not just being polite, Sarah. I know exactly what you've accomplished." Something in his tone made me pay closer attention. This wasn't the casual conversation I'd been expecting. "I've been following your work for the past 2 years," he continued. "The Veterans Academic Partnership Program. Quite remarkable what you've built." My surprise must have shown on my face because he smiled slightly. "You seem shocked that I know about it." Yes, actually. Most people here tonight have never heard of the program, and those who have tend to see it as charitable work rather than anything substantial." Colonel Matthews shook his head slowly. "That's because most people here, despite their good intentions, don't understand what modern warfare does to the human spirit. They know how to train soldiers, how to deploy them, how to use them effectively in combat. But they've never had to figure out how to help those soldiers find purpose and meaning when the war is over." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. 3 years ago, I was approached by someone from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They were looking for innovative programs that were actually working, not just feel-good initiatives that looked impressive on paper. Your program was at the top of their list. I felt a flutter of confusion. "I don't understand. We work with individual hospitals and schools. We've never been involved with any department-wide initiatives." That's because the evaluation was conducted quietly, without fanfare. The VA wanted to understand what was actually making a difference in veterans' lives, not what was generating the most publicity or political support. Colonel Matthews reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a copy of the assessment report. Your program has the highest success rate of any veteran support initiative they've studied. 87% of participants report significant improvement in mental health outcomes. 93% successfully transition to stable employment or education within 2 years. Those numbers are unprecedented." I took the document with trembling hands, scanning the official letterhead and statistics that confirmed everything I'd hoped but never dared to believe. Our program wasn't just helping people, It was revolutionizing how veteran support could work. But there's something else, Colonel Matthews continued. Something I think you should know before we go back inside. He paused, his expression becoming even more serious. Your father didn't just know about this report. He's the one who recommended your program for evaluation in the first place. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man who'd politely praised my compassion just minutes earlier, who'd seemed almost embarrassed by my unconventional career path, had been the one to bring my work to the attention of the Department of Veterans Affairs. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the evening breeze. Dad recommended my program? Colonel Matthews nodded, his expression grave. 18 months ago, the VA convened a task force to identify innovative approaches to veteran support. They specifically wanted programs that were producing measurable results, not just good intentions. Your father was asked to serve on the selection committee because of his extensive experience with soldiers transitioning out of the military. I stared at the document in my hands, trying to process this information. The official seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs seemed to blur as my eyes filled with tears I couldn't quite explain. He submitted a detailed recommendation letter, Colonel Matthews continued. I've read it, Sarah. It's 8 pages long, single-spaced, and it demonstrates a profound understanding of what you've accomplished. He didn't just recommend your program. He made a compelling case for why it represented the future of veteran support services. My mind reeled. 8 pages. Dad had written 8 pages about my work, analyzing its impact and advocating for its broader implementation. The same man who'd seemed to struggle with how to describe my career to his military colleagues had apparently studied my program extensively enough to write a comprehensive evaluation. But why didn't he tell me? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Why did he let me think he didn't understand or value what I was doing? Colonel Matthews was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the base's lights twinkling in the distance. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades understanding the complexities of military culture and family dynamics. Your father is a product of his generation and his training, he said finally. He was taught that effective leadership means maintaining emotional distance, that showing pride or favoritism could be seen as weakness. He's incredibly proud of you, Sarah, but he didn't know how to express that pride without seeming to diminish Marcus's and Emma's achievements. I felt a surge of anger mixed with heartbreak. So he let me spend 5 years thinking I was a disappointment, instead of just telling me he was proud? It's more complicated than that, Colonel Matthews replied gently. Your father has been advocating for your program in ways you never knew about. He's spoken to colleagues at other installations, recommending your services. He's consulted with VA officials about implementation strategies. He's even used his own connections to help secure funding for expansion. The revelation was overwhelming. All those years of feeling like the family failure, of thinking Dad saw my work as insignificant compared to traditional military or medical careers, and he'd been quietly supporting me behind the scenes. There's something else, Colonel Matthews said, reaching into his other jacket pocket. Your father asked me to give you this tonight, but only if the moment seemed right. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's precise handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it, unfolding several pages of the same careful script I'd seen on birthday cards and graduation. Congratulations throughout my life. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then Colonel Matthews has decided the time is right for you to know the truth about how I really feel about your work. I've asked him to share this with you because I've never been good at expressing emotions, and I was afraid that my clumsy attempts at pride might somehow diminish what you've accomplished. I want you to know that I've never been more proud of any of my children than I am of you. Not because I love you more than Marcus or Emma, but because you've done something that required more courage than anything I've ever attempted. You've created something entirely new, something that addresses a problem I've seen destroy good soldiers but never knew how to fix. During my 3 deployments, I watched young men and women serve with honor and distinction, only to struggle terribly when they returned home. I've attended too many funerals for soldiers who survived combat, but couldn't survive the transition back to civilian life. I've seen marriages destroyed, careers derailed, and lives lost because we failed to understand that the battle doesn't end when the deployment ends. What you've built isn't just a program, it's a bridge. You've figured out how to help veterans carry their sense of purpose and identity from military service into civilian life. You've shown them that their skills and experiences have value beyond the battlefield. You've given them a way to continue serving, to continue feeling useful and needed. I've read every article written about your work, studied every report, and followed every expansion of your program. I've recommended it to colleagues across the country, and I've watched the VA take notice of what you've accomplished. You've done more to solve the veteran transition crisis than any government program or military initiative I've encountered. But more than that, you've done it with grace, humility, and genuine care for the people you serve. You've never sought recognition or acclaim. You've simply focused on doing the work that needed to be done, helping people who needed help. That's the highest form of service I can imagine. I'm sorry I never told you this directly. I was afraid that my praise might somehow seem patronizing or that you might think I was just being a proud father. But the truth is, I'm not just proud of you as a daughter. I'm in awe of you as a professional, as a leader, and as a person who saw a problem and dedicated her life to solving it. Your mother and I have watched you grow from a confused college student into a woman who changes lives for a living. We've seen you build something meaningful from nothing, create opportunities where none existed, and touch thousands of lives in ways that will echo for generations. I know this family hasn't always understood your path. Military families often struggle with children who choose different forms of service. We're more comfortable with uniforms and ranks than with innovative programs and technological solutions. But please know that your service is no less valuable, no less important, and no less worthy of respect than any other form of service. You asked me once what I thought you should do with your life. I told you to find something worth fighting for. You did that, Sarah. You found something worth dedicating your life to, and you've fought for it with determination and skill that would make any soldier proud. I hope someday you'll forgive an old soldier for not knowing how to express his pride in a daughter who exceeded every expectation he ever had. With all my love and admiration, Dad. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I understood now why Dad had asked Colonel Matthews to share this with me rather than giving it to me directly. He'd known that his emotions and mine would have made a coherent conversation impossible. He wrote this 6 months ago, Colonel Matthews said quietly. He's been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment to share it with you. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, trying to compose myself. All this time I thought he was disappointed in me. I thought he saw my work as less important than Marcus's military service or Emma's medical career. Your father has never been disappointed in you, Colonel Matthews replied firmly. Confused, maybe? Uncertain about how to support you, absolutely. But never disappointed. He's talked about you with such pride, Sarah. He's shown your program materials to anyone who would listen. He's been your biggest advocate in rooms where you weren't present to advocate for yourself. I thought about all the family gatherings where I'd felt like an outsider, all the conversations where my work had been dismissed or minimized. Had Dad been struggling with the same disconnect I'd been feeling? Had he been trying to protect me from criticism while simultaneously trying to support me? Why didn't he just tell me? I asked again, though I was beginning to understand the answer. Because he didn't want to interfere with your independence, Colonel Matthews said. He was afraid that if you knew he was advocating for you, you might start to doubt whether your success was your own. He wanted you to build your program and your reputation without feeling like you were riding on his coattails. The irony was devastating. Dad had been so concerned about preserving my independence that he'd inadvertently made me feel isolated and misunderstood. His desire to avoid seeming patronizing had resulted in years of me feeling like he didn't value my contributions. There's one more thing, Colonel Matthews said, glancing toward the club's entrance. Your father specifically asked me to tell you about the VA evaluation tonight because he wanted you to know that your success is about to become very public. The Department of Veterans Affairs is planning to announce a major expansion of programs based on your model. They're calling it the Crawford Initiative. I stared at him in shock. They're naming it after me? After you and your father, actually. The Crawford Initiative for Veteran Academic Partnerships. It's going to be implemented in VA hospitals nationwide, with significant federal funding and support. Your program is going to become the national standard for veteran transition support. The magnitude of what he was telling me was almost impossible to process. My small program, which had started with 6 veterans and 12 students in a single Nashville hospital, was going to become a national initiative. Thousands of veterans would have access to the support and purpose I'd been trying to provide. When? I managed to ask. The announcement is scheduled for next month. Your father wanted you to hear it from him first, but he also wanted you to understand that this success is entirely your own. The VA chose your program because it works, not because of any influence he might have had. I looked down at the letter in my hands, rereading certain passages that seemed to glow with new meaning. Dad hadn't just been proud of me. He'd been studying my work, understanding its implications, and advocating for its broader implementation. He'd recognized something in my program that I'd hoped for but never dared to believe: that it represented a fundamentally better approach to veteran support. I need to go inside, I said suddenly. I need to talk to him. Colonel Matthews nodded, understanding immediately. He's been waiting for this conversation for a long time, Sarah. He's just been afraid to initiate it. We walked back toward the club together, the sounds of the ongoing celebration growing louder as we approached. Through the windows, I could see Dad surrounded by colleagues, accepting congratulations and best wishes for his retirement. He looked relaxed and happy, but I could see something in his posture that I'd never noticed before, a certain watchfulness, as if he was constantly aware of where I was in the room. Had he been monitoring my interactions all evening? Had he been worried about how I was handling the family dynamics, the dismissive comments, the polite but uncomprehending responses to my work? As we entered the club, I caught Dad's eye across the room. He excused himself from his conversation and began moving toward us, his expression shifting to something I couldn't quite read. Hope mixed with apprehension, love mixed with uncertainty. Sarah, he said as he approached, his voice carrying an unusual gentleness. I see Colonel Matthews has been keeping you company. I looked at this man who'd shaped my understanding of duty and service, who'd set impossible standards that had driven me to achieve things I'd never imagined possible. I saw past the uniform and the decorations to the father who'd been quietly supporting me while giving me the space to succeed on my own terms. Dad, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. I think we need to talk. He nodded, understanding immediately that something significant had shifted between us. Yes, I think we do. The noise of the celebration continued around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. This was the conversation we'd been avoiding for years, the acknowledgement of pride and understanding that had been lost in translation between military tradition and innovative service. Colonel Matthews stepped back discreetly, allowing us space for what he knew would be a transformative moment. Other guests continued their conversations, unaware that they were witnessing the resolution of a misunderstanding that had shaped our family dynamics for half a decade. I read your letter, I said simply, holding up the pages that had changed everything. Dad's expression softened, relief and vulnerability, replacing the careful emotional control he'd maintained all evening. I wasn't sure I'd ever have the courage to give it to you directly. You've been supporting my work all along, I continued. The VA evaluation, the recommendations, the advocacy I never knew about. I've been trying to support you without interfering, he admitted. I wanted your success to be your own, not something that came from my connections or influence. Looking at him now, I could see the internal struggle he'd been facing. A career military officer who'd built his identity around clear chains of command and traditional measures of success, trying to understand and support a daughter who'd chosen a completely different path. I thought you were disappointed in me, I said softly. I thought you saw my work as less important than Marcus's military service or Emma's medical career. Dad shook his head slowly, his eyes reflecting pain at the misunderstanding we'd both perpetuated. Sarah, what you've accomplished is more important than anything I've ever done. You've solved a problem that has haunted me for my entire career. You've given veterans a reason to hope, a way to find purpose after service. You've created something beautiful and meaningful from nothing. The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. This wasn't the polite praise he'd offered during his speech earlier, but the genuine admiration of one professional recognizing another's extraordinary achievement. I'm sorry I didn't know how to tell you that, he continued. "I'm sorry I let you think I didn't understand or value what you were doing. I've been prouder of you than I've ever been of anything in my life." Around us, the celebration continued, but I was focused entirely on this moment of recognition and understanding. Years of misunderstanding were dissolving, replaced by a connection based on mutual respect and shared commitment to service. "The Crawford Initiative?" I asked, referring to the national program expansion Colonel Matthews had mentioned. Dad smiled, genuine joy replacing the careful composure he'd maintained all evening. "Your program is going to help thousands of veterans find their way back to meaningful lives. It's going to become the standard for how we support our people after service." "That's your legacy, Sarah. That's what you've built." I felt a surge of emotion that combined vindication, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. Not just for the recognition, but for the understanding that my work had value beyond what I'd ever imagined. The program I'd started to help a single struggling veteran was going to become a national model for veteran support. But more than that, I'd finally found my place in this family of dedicated servants. Not as a consolation prize or a different kind of success, but as someone who'd identified a crucial need and dedicated her life to addressing it. Someone who'd honored the family tradition of service while creating something entirely new. 3 months after that life-changing evening at Fort Braxton, I found myself standing in a conference room at the Department of Veterans Affairs headquarters in Washington, D.C., staring at a wall-sized map dotted with hundreds of colored pins. Each pin represented a location where the Crawford Initiative was being implemented, and the sight was both exhilarating and overwhelming. "Phase 1 deployment is exceeding all projected timelines," announced Dr. Rebecca Chen, the VA's Director of Innovation Programs. She clicked through a presentation showing statistics that still seemed surreal to me. "We're seeing enrollment rates 40% higher than anticipated, with waiting lists in most locations." I scanned the room, taking in the faces of regional directors, program coordinators, and policy specialists who'd gathered for our quarterly review meeting. These were people who'd spent their careers working within government systems, and many had initially been skeptical about implementing a program developed by someone with no formal government experience. "The technology platform has been particularly impressive," continued Dr. Chen. "The matching algorithm that pairs veterans with students based on complementary skills and learning styles has resulted in retention rates we've never seen in previous mentorship initiatives." General Patricia Williams, the VA's Chief of Staff, leaned forward in her chair. "What's most remarkable is the feedback from participating schools. Principals are reporting not just improved academic performance among students in the program, but enhanced school culture overall. Having veterans on campus as regular mentors has created a sense of purpose and respect that's affecting the entire student body." I nodded, remembering similar reports from our pilot programs in Nashville. When veterans became visible, valued members of school communities, it changed how everyone thought about service, sacrifice, and the ongoing relevance of military experience in civilian life. "There's something else we need to discuss," said Dr. Chen, her tone becoming more serious. "We've received inquiries from 17 other federal agencies about adapting your model for their client populations. The Department of Justice wants to explore applications for formerly incarcerated individuals. Health and Human Services is interested in programs for aging adults. Education is asking about applications for first-generation college students." The scope of what they were describing was staggering. My program, which had started with 6 veterans and 12 students in a single hospital, was being viewed as a potential template for addressing transition challenges across multiple government departments. "The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has requested a briefing," General Williams added. "They're interested in how your approach to technology-mediated community building could be scaled for national implementation across different populations." I felt that familiar combination of excitement and terror that had accompanied every major expansion of our work. Each new opportunity represented the chance to help more people, but also the risk of growing too fast, losing the personal touch that made the program effective, or getting caught up in bureaucratic complexity that could stifle innovation. "I'm honored by the interest," I said carefully, "but I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what makes this program successful. It works because it's built on genuine relationships between real people who need each other. The technology supports those relationships, but it doesn't replace them." Dr. Chen smiled. That's exactly why these other agencies want to work with you. Most government programs focus on compliance and metrics. Your program focuses on human connection and then measures the outcomes of those connections. It's a completely different approach to social services. After the meeting, I walked through downtown Washington, trying to process everything I'd heard. The federal government wanted to use my program as a model for reimagining how America supported people in transition. It was an incredible opportunity, but also a tremendous responsibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Saw the news article about the White House briefing. Mom and Dad are planning a celebration dinner when you get back to Nashville. Marcus is flying in from Germany. The idea of another family gathering would have filled me with dread a year ago. Now I looked forward to sharing my work with people who finally understood its significance and value. That evening I had dinner with Colonel Matthews, who'd become an unofficial advisor as the program expanded. We met at a quiet restaurant near Capitol Hill, away from the formal meetings and official presentations that had filled my day. "How are you handling all this attention?" he asked after we'd ordered. "Some days I feel like I'm living someone else's life," I admitted. "A year ago, my relatives were asking when I'd get a real job. Now I'm briefing congressional committees and advising other government agencies." Colonel Matthews chuckled. "Your father mentioned that Uncle Robert has been telling everyone in Millbrook that he, quote, always knew Sarah would do something important. Apparently, he's conveniently forgotten his earlier skepticism." I laughed, thinking about how family dynamics had shifted as news of the program's success spread. Relatives who'd been dismissive were now claiming they'd always been supportive. Cousins who'd barely acknowledged my existence were suddenly interested in detailed conversations about my work. "The interesting thing," I continued, "is that the recognition feels good, but it's not what drives me anymore. What gets me excited is hearing from someone like Maria Santos, who just finished her master's degree and is starting a PhD program in social work. Or getting a letter from a high school student who says working with a veteran mentor showed him he was capable of college-level mathematics. That's the mark of someone who's found their true calling," Colonel Matthews observed. "The external validation becomes secondary to the internal satisfaction of doing work that matters." He paused, considering his words carefully. "There's something your father asked me to discuss with you. He's been approached by several universities about establishing academic programs in veteran services. Schools want to create degree tracks that would prepare people for careers in programs like yours." The idea was intriguing. Currently, people working in veteran services came from diverse backgrounds: social work, psychology, education, technology, military experience. But there wasn't a specific academic pathway that prepared professionals for the unique challenges of veteran transition support. Georgetown has proposed a master's program that would combine social work, technology, and military culture studies, Colonel Matthews continued. "They want to name it the Crawford Center for Veteran Community Integration. Your father would serve as the executive director, and they'd like you to design the curriculum." I stared at him in amazement. They want to create an entire academic program based on our approach? They want to institutionalize what you've learned through trial and error, so other people can build on your innovations, rather than starting from scratch. It would be the first graduate program specifically designed to train professionals for veteran community integration work. The implications were enormous. Instead of training individual program coordinators, we could be preparing hundreds of professionals who understood both the technical and human elements of effective veteran support. We could be creating a new field of expertise that didn't currently exist. 2 weeks later, I was back in Nashville, meeting with the program coordinators who'd been with me since the early days. These were the people who'd helped refine our approaches, who'd worked directly with veterans and students, who understood the daily realities of making the program successful. "I need your honest opinions about something," I began, spreading out documents about the various expansion opportunities we'd been offered. "We have the chance to grow exponentially, but I want to make sure we're growing in ways that preserve what makes our program effective." Jessica Martinez, our lead coordinator, studied the proposals carefully. She'd been a social worker before joining our team and brought crucial insights about maintaining program quality during rapid expansion. "The federal agency partnerships could be incredibly valuable," she said, "but only if we maintain control over training standards and implementation protocols. Too many good programs have been destroyed by bureaucratic requirements that ignore what actually works." David Kim, our technology director, nodded in agreement. The university partnerships might be the key to sustainable growth. If we can train people properly from the beginning, rather than trying to retrain government employees who've learned different approaches, we'll have much better outcomes. We spent 3 hours analyzing each opportunity, discussing potential benefits and risks, and developing criteria for making decisions about future expansion. By the end of the meeting, we'd created a strategic framework that prioritized program quality over growth speed, human relationships over technological efficiency, and long-term impact over short-term recognition. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for the family dinner Emma had mentioned. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Marcus's rental car and realized this would be the first time our entire family had been together since Dad's retirement party. The atmosphere was completely different from previous family gatherings. Instead of polite conversations where people tried to avoid topics that might lead to awkward silences, everyone was genuinely interested in hearing about my work. Marcus asked detailed questions about the technology platform. Emma wanted to know about the psychological theories underlying our mentorship matching process. "I've been thinking about something," Mom said as we settled in the living room after dinner. "All these years I thought you were struggling to find your direction because you seemed so different from Marcus and Emma. Now I realize you weren't struggling. You were pioneering." She paused, looking thoughtful. "You were creating a path that didn't exist yet, solving problems that nobody else had figured out how to address. That takes a different kind of courage than following established routes to success." Dad set down his coffee cup and reached for a folder he'd placed on the side table. "Speaking of pioneering, I have something to show you. Remember that letter I wrote to the VA recommending your program for evaluation?" I nodded, remembering Colonel Matthews's revelation about Dad's secret advocacy. "Well, I kept copies of all the correspondence," Dad continued, opening the folder. "Letters to colleagues at other installations, emails to policymakers, reports I submitted to various committees. I documented everything because I wanted you to know someday how many people were working behind the scenes to support your success." He handed me a thick stack of documents, dozens of letters, emails, and reports spanning several years. Each one described my program in detail, advocated for its broader implementation, or connected my work with people who could help expand its reach. "You weren't just quietly proud," I said, scanning through the papers. "You were actively campaigning for my program." "I was trying to build the infrastructure your program would need to succeed at scale," Dad explained. "I knew that good ideas aren't enough. You need networks, resources, and institutional support. I used every connection I'd built during 30 years of military service to create opportunities for your work." Emma leaned over to look at the documents. "This is incredible, Dad. You basically created a shadow advocacy campaign." "I learned something important during my military career," Dad replied. "Individual excellence only goes so far. Sustainable success requires systems, institutions, and networks of support." Sarah had the vision and the skills to create an innovative program. My job was to help create the conditions where that program could thrive. Marcus picked up one of the letters, reading it carefully. "This is to the Secretary of the Army, recommending that Sarah's program be implemented at all major military installations." "Dad, you were essentially proposing to restructure how the entire Army approaches veteran transition support." "That's exactly what I was doing," Dad confirmed. "Sarah's program represented a fundamental improvement over existing approaches. I couldn't just sit back and hope someone else would notice its potential." Looking at these documents, I finally understood the full scope of what had been happening behind the scenes. While I'd been focused on daily program operations, matching veterans with students, refining the technology platform, training coordinators, Dad had been working to create the political and institutional support necessary for national implementation. "There's one more thing," Dad said, pulling out a final document. "This is a proposal I submitted to the Joint Chiefs of Staff 6 months ago. It outlines how your approach could be adapted for active duty military families, helping them build stronger connections with civilian communities during and after deployments." The proposal was comprehensive, detailing how military families could become educational resources for local schools, how military bases could become community assets rather than isolated installations, and how service members could maintain their sense of purpose and identity while building civilian relationships. "This could revolutionize civil-military relations," I said, amazed by the scope of what he'd envisioned. "It's your model," Dad replied. "I just applied it to a different population, with different needs. The fundamental insight remains the same. People need purpose, communities need resources, and the most effective programs are those that honor both sides of that equation." As the evening wound down, I realized that my family's transformation over the past year hadn't just been about recognizing my achievements. It had been about understanding how different forms of service could complement and support each other. Dad's military experience and institutional knowledge had provided crucial support for my innovation and community focus. Emma's medical expertise was helping us understand the health impacts of our program. Marcus's operational experience was informing our expansion strategies. We weren't just individual achievers anymore. We were a family of collaborators, each contributing our unique skills to work that mattered to all of us. A month later, I stood on the stage at Georgetown University's Gaston Hall, looking out at an audience of military leaders, social workers, educators, and policymakers who'd gathered for the official announcement of the Crawford Center for Veteran Community Integration. 5 years ago, I first met a Marine veteran named Tommy Rodriguez, who was struggling to find purpose after losing his legs in combat. He taught me that veterans don't need charity. They need opportunities to continue serving their communities in meaningful ways. I paused, seeing Tommy in the audience, now a successful teacher and mentor who'd become one of our most effective advocates for program expansion. Today, we're announcing not just a new academic program, but a new understanding of what it means to support people in transition. The Crawford Center will train professionals who understand that effective social services aren't about helping people adapt to existing systems, but about creating new systems that honor both individual needs and community assets. The applause was warm and sustained, but what moved me most was seeing my entire family in the front row. Dad beaming with pride, Mom wiping away tears, Emma and Marcus recording the speech on their phones to share with friends and colleagues. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and discussed implementation details, I found myself in conversation with a young woman named Ashley, who'd just finished her master's degree in social work. "I've been following your program since it started," she said. "I wrote my thesis on community-based transition support, and your work was central to my research. I'm hoping to apply for the first cohort at the Crawford Center." I gave her my card and encouraged her to contact our admissions coordinator. But our conversation reminded me of something important. The work we'd started was no longer dependent on any individual person, including me. It had grown into a movement with its own momentum, attracting talented people who would carry it forward in ways I couldn't imagine. That evening, as I flew back to Nashville, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. From the family disappointment who couldn't find her place, to a nationally recognized innovator whose work was reshaping how America supported its veterans. But the most important transformation hadn't been professional. It had been personal. I'd learned that success wasn't about proving skeptics wrong or gaining recognition from people who'd initially dismissed my efforts. Success was about finding work that aligned with your values, building relationships that mattered, and creating something that would continue making a difference long after you were gone. The pilot announced our descent into Nashville, and I could see the city lights spreading out below. Somewhere in those lights were veterans who'd found new purpose through our program, students who'd discovered they were capable of more than they'd imagined, and families who'd been strengthened by loved ones who'd rediscovered their value and worth. Tomorrow, I'd return to the daily work of running a program that now served thousands of people across multiple states. There would be coordinators to train, technology platforms to refine, new partnerships to develop, and challenges to solve. But tonight, I was simply Sarah Crawford, flying home to a city where I'd found my calling, surrounded by family who finally understood that there were many different ways to serve others and make the world better. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, and I couldn't wait to see what we'd build next. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.